aches, pains, tendinitis issues, headaches, all that kind of typical stuff. A lot of those types of issues with when people like yourselves with jobs, that you guys have, I'm assuming a lot of you guys sit at computers and desks all day, can happen from just overuse or poor posture, things like that. So I know in the past we've given talks on kind of some of those kind of things. You guys just had some of our friends over at from Excel Chiropractic, I think a few weeks ago or a couple months ago, talk about some ergonomics at the desk place, which is awesome. So today we're going to change it up a little bit. And like Carly just said, we're going to talk a little bit more about nutrition, inflammation, and what does that even mean. I don't know if there's any nutrition gurus in the room, but we're going to try to give you guys a few pointers today and just maybe a little bit more of a background on why what we put in our body is so important. I'm going to start, basically what I'm going to do here today, just for the first few minutes, is kind of give a recap of some important concepts as far as just our bodies and musculoskeletal kind of conditions that can happen to us and why those happen. And then Tracy is going to kind of take it from there and talk more about the nutrition, inflammation, and how that affects all of those kind of things. So, the first concept I want to introduce to you guys is something called tissue tolerance. And if you read the definition right up there, and I'm not used to having two screens, this is crazy. You guys have a nice place over here, by the way. But the load, which is volume or force that a given tissue can handle without sustaining damage or injury. So, okay, Jeff is a good friend of mine from high school and college. I mean, you guys can tell he doesn't work out ever, right? But what Jeff can handle, maybe sitting all day at a computer, and then in the weight room if he's lifting weights, or maybe he's a marathon runner. A lot of you guys are probably very active people. What he can handle, what his body can handle, what the tissues of his body can handle are going to be way different than probably mine. Everybody is definitely individual. So it's something as doctors, as therapists, whoever you might encounter in your lifetime needs to take account of. And one of the things that influences, this influences the amount of training or sitting without taking a break, or how much stretching you need to do through your day. That all you need to take this into account. So basically what this paragraph says is high quality healthcare providers or coaches or people who you're working with will have the ability to train someone like yourselves at their tissue tolerance to optimize development and prevent unnecessary injury. And so once again, as this applies to all of you guys, I don't know what you do outside of work, but when you're sitting all day at your desk, you can have these repetitive injuries. I don't know, does anybody ever suffer from anything like carpal tunnel? So numbness and tingling in their hands? Anybody? That's awesome. How about like tendinitis or pain in your elbows? Yeah, a few knobs back there, okay. Shoulder issues, neck issues, okay, and then low back issues. And I could go on and on, but those are probably the most common things that we treat on a daily basis from the white collar workforce, computer, desk, kind of ergonomic type things. And what we try to do with people is educate and teach you, what you need to do throughout your day to kind of prevent or counteract, that seated posture all day. So once again, all people are unique, and these are kind of individualized things. Anybody a math guru in here? Do we have any mathematicians or? Oh man, I always wish to hope there's one or two. You like math. You like math. All right. So this is kind of a cool little way to kind of visualize or put this into a mathematical equation. So this equation. Whoops. I equals NF divided by AR. So what does that mean? I is an insult to a tissue. So a high insult to a tissue obviously would be a negative thing, correct? So the more insult you have to a muscle, to a tendon, to a ligament, the worse that is for that tissue. N is the number of repetitions that you put that tissue through, okay? F is the force of the movement relative to a percentage of strength. So we're going to use the example of typing today, since most of you guys are probably on your computers, your keyboards, and your mice all day long. Very little force when it comes to that. Great force would be, I'm bench pressing 300 pounds or whatever. Amplitude is A. So the amplitude of movement basically means the distance you're traveling. So if I'm picking up a box and doing this repetitively all day in a factory, that's a great amplitude of movement. Putting those tissues through a large amplitude. Typing on a keyboard, once again, very small amplitude. And then the R is the rest between repetitions. So let's put the example here into this equation. So typing all day long. How many words can you guys type in a minute? 60? 80? Anybody do like 120? I've heard that before. Okay, a lot though, right? So the number of repetitions when you're typing is going to be what? Pretty big number, right? Because you're just going all day long, right? The force is going to be small. So once again, math geniuses here. A big number times a small number is a big number, right? We're dividing that by the amplitude of this movement, okay, with just our fingers. Amplitude is small or big? Very small, right? And then the rest between repetitions. So how much rest are all these muscles in your hands, wrists, and forearms getting between every repetition, every keystroke? Essentially zero, right? So what you have here is a huge, huge insult to the flexor tendons, to the extensor tendons and muscles in your forearms and wrists. So why people develop tendonitis in their forearms, symptoms like carpal tunnel in their hands, when all they're doing is this all day, right? Does that make sense to you guys? Why that is? And so once again, common things that we see every day in our clinic that need to be addressed with some sort of treatment plan, stretching, mobilization, things like that, but also can be really, you can have great effects from a nutrition side of things as well. So what we put in our bodies, and that's what we're going to focus on talking about today. This is just a cool diagram that kind of gives a different perspective on everything that I'm talking about. So it's called the cumulative injury cycle. So once again, most of you guys, we're going to focus on this white, kind of the white arrows going around this circle here. The green arrows are if you would have an acute injury, like you sprain your ankle or you throw a ball and you feel a pop in your shoulder. That would be an acute injury, like a tear, a crush. You're going to have inflammation, and then you're going to go around the cycle. But let's use the example of typing again, just more of a chronic, repetitive motion type thing all day, every day. You're going to enter into this cycle here where there's increased friction, pressure, and tension on those tissues. Okay? You're going to kind of lead to possibly some tightness, which can decrease circulation. It can cause swelling that you may not see or even feel. Eventually, what happens in those tissues is it leads to adhesions or fibrosis. So if you ever, does anybody have any knots in their neck right here? Okay. So that kind of a thing is what we're talking about when we say adhesion or fibrosis. That can happen in any soft tissue of the body. So we get adhesions, we get fibrosis, we get things like that in our forearms and wrists as the example we're using with typing. And you may not even realize it's there until you start getting the symptom of that problem. So weakness and tightness is what we kind of use up here. You can add in there numbness, tingling, burning, sharp pain. I mean, any kind of symptom that you feel usually presents itself up here. And then guess what? Unless you have some sort of intervention, you're going to keep going around in this cycle. This is a vicious cycle. That until you have some kind of a person like us address it, or you find some good things that you can do on your own to address it, you're probably going to just get stuck in that. And that's why people sometimes they just don't get better and they get worse over time until they seek out care. So once again, though, kind of the purpose of today is going to be right in this kind of area right over here. So you may be stuck in this cycle. You may not even know it yet. Maybe some of you have some symptoms going on. Inflammation is a huge part of what's happening in all of these processes. So inflammation in our bodies is a good thing. Has anybody ever heard that before? I mean, a lot of people think inflammation, like something's inflamed, like ice it to get all that inflammation out. To a certain extent, that's a good thing. You need to control the inflammation, but inflammation is a natural thing that our body does automatically in order to heal itself. So a certain amount of inflammation is good, okay? What we're going to talk about here is excessive, full-body, chronic inflammation. And that's where food, supplementation, and things that we put in our body can really help, okay? We can kind of put our body into a deflamed or an anti-inflamed state, which can help kind of stop this cycle. Is everybody following with me? Kind of making sense a little bit? Okay. Just a couple more things that are just more FYI. We've covered, like I said, if you've been in one of our talks in the past, you've heard this and seen this before. But there's two common conditions, or syndromes is what some people call them, for someone who sits a lot during the day. Upper crossed and lower crossed. Upper cross syndrome is basically, if you would draw this X right through the shoulder looking from the side, line A means something different than line B. Okay? And this kind of stuff we see every day in people that walk in through our doors. Line A is going to be this side of that box right over here. It's going to be what we would call tight or facilitated muscles. So these muscles that we get these knots in, that you always feel this tension in, up in your neck possibly. You may not realize it, but you're probably rounding and slumping and forward in your desk and your keyboard all day. So we get really tight in our pectoral muscles, some of the front side of the shoulder. So this posture is what we're talking about with upper cross. So we get tight in the back of our neck because we're sitting like this. We get tight in the front of our shoulders, right? Okay, and so the other opposite end of that is line B, which is weak or inhibited muscles. So the way the body works is one side gets tight, the other side gets weak. Okay, it just kind of naturally happens that way. So it doesn't really matter the names of all these muscles, but basically the muscles that are supposed to hold our shoulders back and our head in a nice neutral retracted position. Okay, so you kind of have this whole vicious cycle going on once again of a lot of certain muscles are tight and certain muscles are weak. And in order to address or counteract that, you need certain specific modalities. Lower cross syndrome is very similar. So when you sit all day, what muscles, somebody shouted out here, I like interaction. Like what muscles do you think around your back or hips get really tight? Hamstrings possibly could, yes. What's opposite of the hamstring? Quads, okay. What else is right up here in the front of the hip? Hip flexors, right? So there's a lot of different muscles we could name, but basically line A is going to be what gets really tight. Does anybody have a tight low back? I mean, this is like all day, every day, right? How many of us, we stand up and we're like, oh my goodness, I just need to stretch, right? So tightness in our low back happens all the time. What can cause a lot of that, and goes right along with that, is the tightness in the hip flexors. So hip flexors, quadricep muscles, all of these muscles on the front of our leg are shortened when we're sitting down all day, right? So unless you're doing something to actively stretch those every day, probably multiple times a day, then that's probably going to be something that you get stuck in. Line B over here is going to be that weaker facilitated or inhibited muscle group. So the glutes, the core. Probably heard this repeatedly, you know, if you have a low back problem, you need to strengthen your core, right? It's kind of just a common known thing, and you need to do that in specific ways. But this is, once again, a vicious cycle that people get stuck in. And this is just kind of another representation of what happens. The erector spinae muscles are just muscles of the low back. They're going to pull directly on your spine. The iliopsoas is a very strong, powerful hip flexor muscle that's short and tight. You know, when we sit all day, it directly attaches to your lower back vertebrae as well. So it's going to pull directly on that. And it's going to basically tip your pelvis into this forward rotated position. Okay, so if you're tight here and tight here, weak here and weak here, we're going to walk around like this all day, right? Okay, so, and maybe not necessarily, you know, the booty walk there, but this is the presentation that a lot of us are stuck in. Okay, so low back pain. Hip pain, all these kind of things that most of us have at some point in our life, okay? And then the last thing here before we jump into the nutrition part of this is kind of this, I just wanted to share this with you guys because I found this, a physical therapist that we know kind of came up with this, and we've known this for a long time, but his representation of this is just easy to follow. The red or pink or whatever color you see there is basically the areas of the body that need to be really mobile. Okay, so areas that you need to spend stretching a lot, taking care of in that way. And then the yellow or off-white or whatever color that is are the areas that need to have really good stability. Okay, so let's go from the foot up. The ankle and the foot need to be very stable. That ankle joint right between kind of your leg bones and your ankle need to have a lot of good mobility in them. If they don't, then that can affect things all the way up and down the chain. The hip joint is a ball, oh, skip the knee. Knee needs to be stable. The hip joint needs to be very mobile. It is a ball and socket joint, which means a lot of motion. Okay? So you need to stretch your hips out a lot. The pelvis and then low back, which we just call this the central core. So your core needs to be very stable. The thoracic spine. Okay, so kind of between the shoulder blades on Tracy here, kind of from the base of her neck down to about this part of her back below the shoulder blades, that area of our spine, and once again, we're hunched over all day, we're at our desks, we're at our computers, it becomes very fixated in flexion in most of us, and it needs to be very mobile in extension and rotation. If we lose that mobility through that part of our spine, usually, yeah, we might feel tight and stiff in that area, but guess what's going to happen? You're going to have pain and symptoms somewhere else, usually lower back, hips, or up in the neck, okay? So definitely needs to be mobile. The shoulder blade, what we call the shoulder girdle back here, needs to have a lot of good stability in it. The shoulder joint itself, so once again, the shoulder joint is a ball and socket joint, needs to be very mobile. So that'd be a great thing to do a lot of stretching with. And then you can kind of hardly see this. You need to have good stability in the neck muscles, good mobility up at the very top of our neck between our skull and our top two vertebrae. So us as chiropractors, for example, when I'm adjusting people, usually in the neck, I hardly ever adjust anything below the second or third vertebrae down, unless there's a very specific issue that's going on. Usually the adjustments that we do are up at the very top and then down through that thoracic spine here. And this is kind of why, okay? Elbow stable, wrist mobile, and hand stable, okay? So it's just kind of a cool little picture for you guys to kind of take and do some good things on your own with. So, I'll take one.
Sure. Okay, so talking about a lot of the joint stuff, like Scott's talking about, as chiropractors, we treat musculoskeletal stuff. So, but we also need to be able to differentiate if it's a mechanical thing. So that's kind of something we can do in office, or if it's something deeper. So today we're talking about diet, and I listed a couple other things there. If you have some stress in your life, like a lot of people can feel some sort of physical pain with that, or if you're sedentary. So this is an example of a joint issue, osteoarthritis, most people are familiar with. It's just kind of a list of things that we see with people that have OA. They eat a lot of sugar, flour. They eat a lot of omega-6 fatty acids. We'll talk about that a little bit. Basically, your processed fats, increased trans fat, increased salt, increased smoking, and then they don't get enough of the omega-3s, enough vitamins, enough phytonutrients, and they don't exercise enough. And that list there is basically identical for things like plaque development in your arteries, metabolic syndromes, hyperglycemia, hyperlipidemia. So a lot of things that drive a lot of terrible diseases in America. So there's going to be a few studies throughout. I'm not going to get super detailed into them, but this is just a study about lipid metabolism and osteoarthritis. So basically what it says is we know osteoarthritis is kind of a thing associated with obesity, but they've been finding a lot of it also more deeply related to how you metabolize lipids, so your fats. A lot of things go into that, but it's pretty much directly related to what your diet is and if you exercise and how your body can metabolize that. So if you have excess lipids, you're more likely to develop osteoarthritis a lot sooner than maybe somebody else would. Another one, so we talk about low back pain, disc degeneration. People get it, and you're going to degenerate as you get older, and that's kind of inevitable, but we can slow that process through diet. So basically this is kind of talking about eating and clogging your arteries and how that is related to disc degeneration and low back pain. So I'm going to go through a few different things that people usually have issues with, rotator cuff stuff. This study says lifestyle metabolic factors in relation to shoulder pain and rotator cuff tendinitis. So ultimately this is relating lifestyle, so working out, eating, and how you metabolize your food can be a direct correlation to rotator cuff tendinitis.
Yeah, and I'm just going to throw in real quick. So this, when we're treating people, and I guess what the part of this that I was talking about, all these postural issues, if we're treating someone who's not responding to the treatments on, so say someone comes in with rotator cuff tendinitis, and I'm treating their shoulder, and I'm adjusting them and doing all sorts of muscle work, and also giving them corrective exercise, and a period of time goes by and they're just not getting any better, well, first of all, you rule out other pathologies, like maybe that rotator cuff's torn or something like that, but say that's all normal too. This is where this kind of stuff comes in to play, you know, how your body metabolizes things and what you're putting into your body may be directly causing a tendinitis in your shoulder, okay? And people just don't think about that stuff. And it's huge, especially in our culture where our grocery stores, I mean, 90% of the food in our grocery stores is just processed junk. I mean, to put it nicely. So,
Yeah, so kind of just repeating what I was saying, there's a big association between shoulder pain and abdominal obesity and other metabolic issues, is kind of what that study said. Patellar tendonitis, so that's basically knee pain right here. We see this a ton with runners. So this is also, they studied volleyball players here, and I'm pretty sure they were male and female, but they found specifically with males, I think that waist girth, so right around here, so a lot of abdominal obesity is a good measurement to figure out if you are more likely to get patellar tendonitis. So you got to think if you're carrying more weight and you're running, you would think there'd be more force on that joint, but it's also a lot more than that. So how you're eating, your level of fatty acids, if you're in an inflammatory state. So there's that. Achilles tendinopathy, so back here, also see that a lot with some runners. And this is kind of, let me go back, same kind of thing, central fat distribution in men, so that abdominal obesity is kind of associated with that. Also another one, Achilles tendinopathy with insulin resistance. So we're looking at eating a high processed sugar diet and how our bodies are able to process that. So, okay, so I like this saying, let food be thy medicine, or like food is fuel, and it truly is. Research has shown that food may be relevant when discussing why someone is in pain and can also guide pain treatment. So Scott's kind of talking about somebody's got rotator cuff stuff. Maybe he's been working on them a lot and they're still in pain. Kind of have to see what they're eating and see if that's driving it. Food is functional. So it has the ability to make you feel better, to combat disease and promote health, or it has the ability to do the complete opposite and promote disease.
has anybody ever known anybody with frozen shoulder? Or heard of that before? Yeah, okay, a couple people. So frozen shoulder is when the ligaments in the capsule around the shoulder get so tight and adhesive that the person literally cannot move their shoulder. I mean, and the common medical treatment for that really is just, it's just going to go away eventually, hopefully, knock on wood, right? There has been, once again, some of these studies, I don't think we have that specific one up there, but there is a direct link to a high percentage of people with frozen shoulder having high hemoglobin A1C levels. And if you don't know what that is, you can see that on, I think, a complete blood count. So you guys get your blood drawn, I think, at Union Bank, right, or you can for kind of your wellness checks and things. So the A1C level is very important. If you ever run a high A1C level, basically that's how much sugar is in your blood, right? So diabetics are going to have issues with that, and your doctor is going to monitor that. But once again, it's just not commonly thought of, where a high hemoglobin A1C level is a high predictor of someone's going to have a problem like a shoulder, frozen shoulder someday. So these are things that we always want to think about taking into account.
So this is kind of an article about that. Why should we be interested in what our patients are eating? This is the quote I really like. The diet may have relevance for pain and pain treatment. It's a really great article. Just kind of discussing that. And you hear a lot about genetics. So like my mom had cancer, or my mom had heart disease, I'm probably going to get that. So yes, all of you in this room might be predisposed to something that's in your family. But diet and supplementation can often help prevent and treat those. And I think we're hearing a lot more about that now. So while you're genetically predisposed, so say it's heart disease, it's whether or not you create an environment to cause that to be expressed. So ultimately, don't let those genetics be a death sentence. You can take an active role in your health. So live to promote an anti-inflammatory state. So Scott talked earlier about inflammation a little bit. So what is inflammation? And I think he said that something along these lines. The inflammatory process itself is not harmful. So the example I have here is like you have a cut, and you'll see like maybe it swells a little bit, then you get a scab, and that's great. Like our body needs to heal things. But when it gets a little out of hand is when your body's unable to handle those acute situations, and basically you're just bombarding the system with chronic irritation. So this creates chronic inflammation, and then you're kind of unable to combat those diseases or just random sicknesses you feel throughout your day. So why are we inflamed? So we're going to talk a little bit about the standard American diet. It's not the best. Now we have the My Plate instead of the food pyramid. So it's separated into these food groups we should be having. So it's basically made up of grains, refined sugars, a lot of processed foods. They mention eat your vegetables, but people don't do that a ton. The quality of meat's gone down, and then people don't exercise. So if you look at the plate, the fruits and vegetable side's pretty good, but grains are taking up more than protein on that right side, which we'll talk a little bit about that. And then you've got a little bit of dairy, also an inflammatory food in our diet. So we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go on. So the little red X like that. I like this little pie chart. So on the left is our hunter-gatherers, so people long before us, kind of what they eat. So they eat a lot of fruits, vegetables, and nuts, lean game, wildfowl, eggs, fish, shellfish, whatever they could find, basically. And then over here on the right is kind of what our pie chart looks like. So a lot of processed stuff like cereal, random sweeteners, a lot of fatty meat, and then a very small portion of that is dedicated to fruits and vegetables. So you can see how much that's changed. Our food is definitely changed over the years. People are trying to make cheaper food, which usually means it's replaced with a lot of crap. So let's talk about grains. Grains have basically only been consumed for about 10,000 years, and our world has been around a little longer than that. The body's not really genetically adapted for grains, refined sugars, or hydrogenated fat. So basically our genetic code is not different than those people that came before us, but what is different, like I was saying, is our food. A lot of cheap processed foods versus real food. Let's talk a little bit more about grains. Grains contain something called phytic acid, and basically this phytic acid decreases our body's ability to absorb things like calcium, magnesium, iron, and zinc. It's not spelled right. But like calcium, for instance, so we treat a lot of bone things. So we hear women develop osteoporosis, things like that. If we're eating a ton of grains and our body's not able to process things like calcium, we'll see bone diseases like osteoporosis come around a lot sooner than they should. And then it also increases our body pH. So we should be in a more alkaline state than an acidic state. And that kind of increases that.
Has anybody ever heard that or read that anywhere where the acidic environment in our body, like that's for an example would be cancer cells feed in an acidic environment, so they grow and they get bigger and they multiply. The more acidic we are, it's just one of those things. Like, and grains is an easy one, because gluten, the whole gluten-free nation and all that stuff. The problem with that we see and more in the studies in the nutrition world is people with like true gluten intolerance, so celiac disease. Somebody probably know people with celiacs, full-blown celiacs. Most of us, and I wouldn't be hesitant to say 90% of us, have an intolerance to grains, not just gluten. Gluten's one part of the grain. To grains in general, kind of what she said, we can't process, our body isn't meant to process them. So it can, maybe some of you guys have heard about this or read this, like leaky gut syndrome. Have you heard about that? So it's just the way we absorb and process the foods we put in. It creates a leaky gut, so things can pass through that aren't meant to pass through, creating this acidic environment. So it's putting our body in this chronic inflamed state, making us more sick, and sometimes we don't even know it, right? So just because you consume a lot of grains and you don't have necessarily what you think is a problem, because you don't have celiac, so I'm fine, maybe not, right? So our bodies can hide that pretty well.
Right, and celiac is like an outward symptom.
Yeah,
like
it's an outward symptom.
Not everybody feels those outward symptoms, but that doesn't mean you're not causing some harm internally. So Scott just mentioned gluten, so we're going to talk a little bit about that. That's right. So we've got some things up there like bread and pasta and beer. I'm sure some of you like to drink beer. Gluten is a mixture of proteins found in wheat and grains. So just breaking it down a little bit more, barley, rye, malt, and oat are just a few there. So gluten basically is why it's named gluten. It's the glue that helps food hold their shape. So like Scott mentioned, it's been the main driver in people with celiac disease. But besides that, it drives a lot of other issues. So like many of you might have headaches all the time, digestive complaints, so irritable bowel syndrome, anemia, and chronic fatigue. So somebody's always tired might want to take a look at what they're eating. We're talking a little bit about lectins. So there's a bunch of beans up there. That's kind of an example. Lectins are a large class of carbohydrate-binding proteins that bind to certain sugars. So they're found in grains, beans, lentils, and soy. So not all lectins are bad. Some lectins are really great in moderation, good fiber, but some can be pretty problematic if eaten a lot. So these are the two groups of lectins that are kind of problematic. And so the first one is prolamins, and that's your gluten. And then the second one is agglutinin, which is things like wheat germ, kidney beans, and soy. So ultimately, all this stuff's really hard for our body to digest. And like Scott was mentioning, this can kind of interact with the gut, create little openings, causing things like leaky gut. And then it can stimulate a negative immune system response. So maybe you get sick a lot, something like that. So earlier I talked about omega-3 fatty acids. I'm sure a lot of you have heard of these, or maybe you take an omega-3 supplement. Awesome if you do. They are naturally anti-inflammatory. And there's a really drastic deficiency in the American diet. Way too many omega-6s and not enough omega-3s. So this can help. So this is really important actually for us. So it can help promote good joint and bone health. So as chiropractors, we love that. And other things like your emotional health, how you regulate sugars, and your nervous system. And that's a nice little study there, how supplementing omega-3s is really great for inflammatory joint pain.
Are you done with omega-3s?
Yes.
I just wanted to throw in one thing on that too. Was it last summer? Kind of gets away from me, but where there was a bunch of headlines on the news and in the newspapers about supplement companies and the supplements that you buy at Walgreens or Walmart, and how they were testing them and they were finding that they're full of junk. Basically, they use fillers. So you have this horse pill of omega-3, and really like 2% of it was actually omega-3. So what are you really putting in your body? One thing just to think about, okay? And then the other thing, specifically with omega-3s, is if you have an omega-3 supplement and you take it, and we hear people complain a lot about, I can't do that because I belch up fish, right? You have that fishy aftertaste or that fishy taste. That's not a good quality omega-3 then, more than likely. You should not be having that symptom. So once again, it's just something you can ask us questions later. I don't want to get too into, but we use a company specifically that makes supplements from all whole food. It's called Standard Process, and their tuna omega-3 capsule. I don't know if I've ever had, maybe one person out of however many hundreds of thousands that take it have ever said they've had a problem with that. And I think they were really hypersensitive to it. So once again, should not be having that kind of thing happen if it's a quality product. Just wanted to throw that in real quick.
We're going to talk to omega-6s. So omega-6s are not necessarily bad. It's just the ratio that we want to focus on. So the ratio of 3s to 6s should be 1 to 1. But our American diet is more like 1 to 20, 1 to 50. So we're eating a ton of omega-6s. They're also called PUFAs, polyunsaturated fatty acids. So I'll refer to them as that. So too many of these PUFAs can contribute to this chronic inflammation. So we're eating a ton of processed foods, basically, or what you'll see with your PUFAs. So this is a really awesome list of some pro-inflammatory foods. So stuff that we've talked about, the grain family. So there's bread there, a bunch of grain-fed meat, chips, peanut butter, and stuff like that. All these bad oils at the bottom here. You can see these ratios are really big to really small. So a lot of omega-6s to like,
Does anybody else look at that list and be like, oh crap, I love all those foods.
And then we've got our anti-inflammatory list. So like all of this stuff is real food here. So your fruit, your vegetables, your healthy tubers, so white sweet potatoes, quality meats, fresh fish, salmon, and then bacon. Actually, if it's quality bacon, you're really good to go. So that's exciting. has a sinus issue, I would probably tell one of my patients, hey, stay with dairy for a little bit, because that can kind of cause a little bit more inflammation. But dairy, quality dairy with all the fat can be actually very beneficial fat. So a lot of people shoot for like low fat milk, skim milk, all that kind of stuff. But when you take all the fat out of something, they have to put something else in there to make it, be solid. So shoot for quality stuff with all the fat. Don't be scared of that, because it actually can be very beneficial. And I think that's kind of what it's referring to there, low fat, skim milk stuff. And then this is a list of oils and fats. So at the top are your anti-inflammatory ones. So most of you probably have heard of olive oil and coconut oil. There's been some recent research about olive oil. They said it wasn't the greatest to cook with because of its low heat capacity, but actually it's a much better choice than the ones that are going to be listed here at the bottom. But coconut oil, that's probably your best cooking oil. It has a really high heat capacity, so you can cook it really high on the stove or the oven. Butter up there, that's not margarine. So butter, like quality butter that's from ideally some grass-fed cows. And then pro-inflammatory, so we're looking at corn oil, sunflower oil, safflower, some soy oil. So those oils you're going to see a lot when you go out to eat. So when they fry their friends, something like that. It's really cheap. So here's just a list of disorders associated with eating too much of these pizzas. So heart attacks, strokes, arthritis, asthma, colitis, headaches, menstrual cramps, and like I think I mentioned before, osteoporosis. Going fast there. So I'm going to talk a little bit about this. I'm just reading a bunch about this nuclear factor light chain enhancer of active B cells. Quite a mouthful, but this is a really important thing when it comes to regulating your immune system and how you respond to inflammation. So if you have incorrect regulation of this, you see a lot of inflammatory responses. So things like cancer, autoimmune diseases, viral infections. And I'll kind of show you why this is important, and maybe you've heard of some of this stuff. So it's a good little diagram of some of the diseases that are linked to this. So a lot of stuff we talked about. A few things like Alzheimer's are on there, MS, Crohn's, psoriasis, and then, so there's probably been a lot of stuff in the media that you guys have heard about adding different spices to your diet, like turmeric's a big thing we talked about. They've talked a lot about adding ginger, so these are just a few things you could add in your diet daily to kind of, these are really great things to kind of block this. So garlic, I pretty much put garlic on like everything because it's really good, so that's one. Pomegranates are really tasty, so you can add in your diet. Even dark chocolate you see listed there, so that's exciting. And a vitamin D. So it's summer, get outside, get some sun. At least 10 minutes a day. You guys just do it, or take a vitamin D supplement. It's really helpful there. Okay, so here's our anti-inflammatory diet. Just kind of broke it down in a list. So let's start off with our fish, our lean meats, and eggs. So we want to get our meat from quality sources. We want to get our eggs from quality sources, and our fish from quality sources. So meats that are pumped with antibiotics, we want to kind of avoid that because you're putting that in the body. Eggs, maybe if they're free range. Fish that's wild caught and not in a farm. Fruits and vegetables, of course. Sweet potatoes and other tubers. So some people can't tolerate potatoes. I can, and so I usually eat them in moderation, but they're really tasty. Raw nuts. So try to avoid nuts that are covered in a bunch of salt or other sweeteners possibly. And then these are some of the spices I was just talking about. Dark chocolate, ideally above 7% cocoa. So it's not going to be as sweet, but much more beneficial than all the added sugars. And then, you guys like to drink. I know like ladies probably like wine. So red wine in moderation can be also very good for you. And then stout beer, because it's got a really low grain content. Or gluten-free beer, there's a lot of options nowadays. Okay, so how do you start? We're just going to go a little bit through how we do this. So let's start this one. So before you go, make a list. Sometimes I'll go in there and like window shop and throw in a bunch of stuff that I should not put in my cart, but stick to it. So have a plan, go in there and get it done. So prioritize your budget. So what do you really need? Like, do you need that thing of Oreos? Probably not. Are you replacing it with a really healthy vegetable? Like, just prioritize that. So let's focus on what we need. We need our fats and oils. So whatever we want to cook with, our protein, our carb, our fruit, and our veggie. Organic versus non-organic. So if you're on a budget, this is not a huge priority for you. So you don't need to focus on getting all organic stuff. I like this list up here. This is the dirty dozen and the clean 15. So these ones on the left are ones you would try to get organic if you can afford to get it organic, because basically all of those either have no skin or really light skin. So if there's rain pesticide, it's easily goes into the fruit or vegetable. And then over on the right are clean ones. So they've either got hard outer coating or they're in the ground, so they don't get much pesticides. And then choose your favorite store or go to a bunch of different ones. Find the deals. I've been recently like looking at those ads that they shove in your mailbox and circling stuff, and it's actually really helpful. So you've got pretty good options here. And while you're there, shop the periphery. So stay on the outside of the grocery store. I'm sure you've heard that, but usually in the aisles there's a lot of processed boxed stuff that you should try to avoid. So don't browse. Like I said, stick to your list, and then read the labels. So this is a really good label that kind of breaks down the difference between the nutrition facts and then the ingredients list. I think they're changing this soon. But if you look at this, it's like, oh, this is I think this is a sauce of some sort. But it's like, oh, this is only 15 calories, no fat, everything's 0. And then if you look at the ingredients, which I would have zoomed in on this a little bit, it's like the first ingredient is sugar. And then soy, wheat, salt, modified food starch, caramel color. So it's a bunch of stuff that bodies like would not love, but it looks outwardly like it's fairly healthy.
And if there's a lot of words that you can't pronounce, it's not good.
Yeah.
Probably all heard that before, right? Chemicals.
So in the kitchen, so if you're like trying to make a change, kind of go through the cabinets and figure out what you want to keep and donate stuff that you don't want to eat anymore. Maybe you have a bunch of stuff in there that's like, okay, if I just get rid of this, I won't eat it. Donate it. It's a much better thing to do. Then figure out your staple bulk items. So what do you need to buy in bulk? You can order that stuff online much cheaper. Buy a new kitchen gadget or replace your pans. I have cast iron there because why were they using cast iron 50 years ago? It's actually really great. When you cook in it, it kind of releases that iron, and it's really a lot of quality. You can go from the stove to the oven. And then schedule what you're going to eat throughout the week. I know it's kind of a pain, but it keeps you on track. If you have kids, invite them to cook with you or buy a new cookbook, and then make it fun so you can get these gone and question. So we talked about this before. This is a list of fats and oils you can shop for. So for cooking on the left, like I said before, coconut oil is one of my faves. Bacon fat. So bacon, high quality bacon can be good. When I cook bacon, I save the fat every time and just put it in a mason jar and cook with it. Duck fat, they sell that in stores now. It's a little expensive, but very good. Ghee, if any of you guys have not heard of that, it's clarified butter. So they just like simmer the butter down and it releases all of the dairy. So there's no dairy in it, and it's really tasty. Grass-fed butter and palm oil is just basically coconut oil in a different kind of solid form. And then for cold uses, avocado oil, nut oils, and sesame oil would be good, like if you're making a salad. And then olive oil I have with the asterisk because it can be used for cooking, but it's better as a cool use. These are the ones we want to avoid. So a lot of hydrogenated oils, margarine, canola oil, corn oil. These are all really, really cheap. But there's a reason why they're really cheap. Sweeteners, if you have a sweet tooth or you bake a lot, the ones on the left are things you can kind of start replacing with. So coconut and palm sugar, that second one, I really love it. It reminds me of brown sugar, so I replace it in anything that requires that. Honey, try to look for raw honey or something that's local. Sometimes at Walmart I've seen honey that's, you don't pay attention on the back, it's 50% honey, 50% corn syrup. that. Maple syrup, fruit juice. I'm sure a lot of people heard of stevia. It's kind of become a pretty big thing. That can also be a really good replacer. It just tastes a little bit something to get used to. And then dates at the top of that list are really good, actually. On the right, we've got things to kind of get rid of. So your corn syrup, sucrose, aspartame. I'm sure a lot of you have heard of that also. Kind of one of those things that they've associated with cancer. So you'll see that in a lot of your like diet pops. And then a few other things on that list. Basically stuff that's really hard to pronounce. Just kind of look them. So like I talked about baking, I really like baking. So I try to do that in like a healthier way. So I do a lot of gluten-free, grain-free baking. So on the left are a lot of grain-free, gluten-free flours. So almond flour, coconut flour, arrowroot, tapioca flour are my 4 main ones that I really like to use in baking. And then on the right are some other things you might need, some chocolate chips. At Hy-Vee they sell Enjoy Life chips. They're dairy-free, soy-free, gluten-free. They're just really awesome and they taste just like chocolate chips. And then stuff like coconut milk. I use the full-fat coconut milk in the can. It's really great. I use it in smoothies, stuff like that. Those are a few other things. Sauces and dressings. So sauces are super important to pay attention to. If you don't look on the back, the first ingredient might be, like that one before, might be sugar or something like that. So coconut aminos at the top is probably one of my most used sauces in my house. It is a substitute for soy sauce. So if you do a lot of Asian cooking, really it's in a lot of things that I make. It's a great alternative. Fish sauce, just watch out for your hot sauces, your mustards, your ketchups. Make sure there's no like hidden wheat or gluten in there. Vinegar, lemon juice, and chicken stock, beef stock, all those things. If you're a snacker, here's a really good list of things to have on hand. So nuts and seeds, dried fruit, dried meat. If you like canned tuna, I despise it, but if you like it, go for it. Granola, some fruit, veggies, and you can boil a bunch of eggs and canned meat, and that'd be a great snack too. So we're gonna make a meal. Here's the ideal math behind it. So we should have protein, we should have fat, a carb, and then whatever flavor you need. So meat, we want to look for high quality meat, like I said before. Your healthy fat, so maybe that's whatever oil you're cooking it in, or maybe it's like an avocado or a handful of nuts or something like that. Your carb, so you can do that in the form of veggie or fruit, or you can go a different route. So you can tolerate things like white rice, sweet potato, white potato. I'm going to talk a bit about rice here. So there's white rice and brown rice. White rice is actually a lot better for you because brown rice has things called phytates in it that make it that brown color. They're a lot harder to digest than white rice. So go for the white rice instead. And then seasonings or sauce. So basically that's also part of your flavor there. Okay, if you like to go out on the weekends, it can be really stressful if you're trying to stick to your diet. So we'll talk a little bit about what to do. So if you're going to go out to eat, you know where you're going to go out to eat. Look at the menu online. Plan ahead so you don't get there and all your friends are ordering French fries and you're like, oh, okay, I'll just do what everybody else does. Have a plan and pick a place. If somebody says, hey, do you want to pick, then do it. Pick something that you know you can make a good choice at. And it might not be perfect, but if it can be closer to the good side, that's okay. It's okay to have your little cheats, here and there. So here's 8 really great tips. So a lot of places give you free bread. It's really tasty, but just skip it. Try to avoid that. Keep it really simple. So you can ask a lot of questions or ask for substitution. So maybe your meal has some chicken and vegetable mixture with a bunch of sauce. You can usually ask for, can you leave that sauce off or can you leave that seasoning off? Ask them, don't be afraid to ask a bunch of questions. So ask them what they cook their food in. Ask for water, so try not to drink your meal basically. Order lean meats, and just plan ahead. So I really like ciders. So if you like to drink, these are now a really great choice if you're avoiding gluten. But while we're making healthy choices, we need to still make healthier choices. So these are a bunch of ciders. I'm sure many of you have heard of on the right, Greek Orchard or Woodchuck. Almost every place has those. But if you look at how much sugar is in it, it's 24 grams of sugar per drink, which is half of your daily allowance. So if you're going out there and drinking 2 wood chucks, not exactly doing yourself any favors, so kind of pay attention to that kind of stuff if you're drinking. Moving on, if you like to drink liquor, gin and tequila and vodka are kind of 3 really great ones. They're clear liquors. If you're going for tequila, look for 100% agave. And then vodka, look for stuff that's made more with corn, potato, or grape based than a grainy based vodka. And those are just some examples of tequila and vodka. Mixed with some club soda or soda water, or just plain water. Would be a good choice instead of that pop. It's an acquired taste, but would be a much better choice. So if it's a special occasion, like don't be afraid to splurge, but don't go overboard. So limit yourself to a few drinks. Wine, the sweeter the wine, the more sugar. Obviously makes a lot of sense. Beer, maybe you have 1, or maybe you have 3 that are gluten-free or something. You're making a better choice that way. So just limit it. If you're gonna have a Bloody Mary, just kind of check what's in it. If you're traveling, plan ahead. This is super important. It's nothing like getting on the road and stopping at a gas station and having to make a bad choice or pulling over to that fast food restaurant. Bring a cooler. It saves you money and it saves you time. You don't have to stop. So here's a few examples: some raw nuts, some dark chocolate, raw veggies, cheese, purple eggs, and fruit. But if you stop at a gas station, there's some decent choices. Most places have like hard-boiled eggs, some decent cheese, maybe some roasted turkey, nuts, carrots, sweet potato chips would be a decent option. And drink a ton of water. You might have stopped to eat, but it's okay. And then kind of just concluding this, basically we don't want to look at eating as dieting because you can't really stick to a diet forever. It should be something that's more of a lifestyle thing. So just eat real quality foods. It can help you kind of understand what your body wants and doesn't want. Maybe one of you can tolerate rice, maybe the next person can't.